Have you ever wondered how quickly your entire world can change with just one wrong encounter? How a peaceful afternoon can become the day you discover that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones wearing badges. A corrupt police officer sexually harasses her, but her call for help to a fierce internal affairs sergeant unleashes a citywide reckoning that exposes years of abuse and transforms both women into unstoppable forces of justice. If you love interesting stories like this that expose the truth, please give this video a thumbs up and tell us in the comments section where in the world you are watching this video, and also do well to smash that subscribe button. The afternoon sun hung heavy over Riverside Park in downtown Memphis, Tennessee. Sarah Martinez sat alone on a wooden bench, lost in the pages of her worn paperback novel. At 22, she had learned to find peace in quiet moments like these. The gentle rustle of oak leaves above her head created a soft melody that made her feel safe in this corner of the world. But safety can disappear in an instant. "What's a girl like you doing here all by herself?" The voice came from behind her, dripping with mockery and something darker. Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew that tone. The kind that meant trouble was coming whether she wanted it or not. She turned slowly, her thumb still marking her place in the book, as if holding on to that simple act could somehow protect her from whatever was about to happen. Two police officers stood there, their uniforms crisp in the fading sunlight. The larger one, built like a linebacker who had given up sports for cynicism, wore a badge that gleamed like he polished it every morning. His nameplate read, Officer Davis. Beside him stood a younger man, Officer Thompson, who kept shifting his weight from foot to foot like he wished he could be anywhere else in the world. "I'm just reading," Sarah said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded when her hands were shaking. "I'm not doing anything wrong." Officer Davis smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the kind of smile that made Sarah's skin crawl. He stepped closer, his heavy boots crunching on the fallen leaves beneath his feet. "You got some ID on you, sweetheart? Need to make sure you belong here." The word belong hit Sarah like a slap. She had heard it before, growing up in foster care, moving from house to house where she never quite belonged anywhere. But this was different. This was public property. This was supposed to be safe. "I don't need ID to sit in a public park," she said, clutching her book tighter. That's when Officer Davis did something that would change everything. Quick as lightning, he flicked his baton toward her, using it to lift the hem of her sundress just enough to make her jump back in horror and humiliation. "What is wrong with you?" Sarah shouted, her voice cracking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. She clutched her skirt, her cheeks burning with shame and anger. Officer Davis laughed, a cold, ugly sound that echoed off the trees. "Lighten up, sweetheart. Just making sure you're not hiding anything." Officer Thompson gave an uncomfortable chuckle, clearly wishing he could disappear into the ground. His eyes darted everywhere except toward Sarah, as if not looking would somehow make him less guilty of what was happening. Sarah felt something break inside her, not in a way that made her weaker, but in a way that made her stronger. "You think you can do this to anyone?" she shot back, her voice growing steadier with each word. Officer Davis shrugged like he was discussing the weather. "Not anyone. Just girls like you." Those words hit Sarah like bullets. Cold, sharp, designed to cut deep. But instead of backing down, she reached for her phone with hands that had suddenly stopped shaking. She knew exactly who to call. The only person who had ever truly stood up for her. "Keisha," she said when the call connected. "I need you." There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice that had saved Sarah's life more times than she could count. "Where are you, baby girl?" Sarah told her, speaking clearly despite the two officers watching her every move. "Don't you move an inch," Keisha Washington said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that could stop traffic. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Sarah put her phone away and sat back down on the bench, staring out at the small pond in the center of the park. The water was still and peaceful, reflecting the sky like a mirror. She tried to match that stillness, even though her heart was pounding like a drum in her chest. Officer Davis and Officer Thompson stood nearby, probably expecting her to leave or apologize or do something that would make their lives easier. But Sarah had learned long ago that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to move. So she sat there, stubborn as the old oak trees around her, and waited. Keisha Washington had found Sarah 7 years ago, when Sarah was just 15 and running away from her 4th foster home. Keisha was a police officer then, working the night shift, and she could have just processed Sarah like another runaway statistic. Instead, she saw something in Sarah that no one else had bothered to look for: potential, strength, a future worth fighting for. Keisha became Sarah's mentor, her big sister, her fierce protector. She helped Sarah finish high school, get into college, and most importantly, taught her that she deserved respect simply because she was human. When Keisha got promoted to internal affairs 3 years later, Sarah wasn't surprised. Keisha Washington was the kind of person who made things right, no matter how much trouble it caused her. Now Sarah could hear it, the deep rumble of Keisha's Dodge Charger cutting through the afternoon quiet. No sirens, no flashing lights, just that engine purring with barely contained power. The sound made Sarah's shoulders relax for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Keisha got out of her car like she was walking onto a movie set. She wore her uniform with pride, every crease perfect, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her badge clipped to her belt where everyone could see it. But it was her eyes that made Officer Davis take a step backward. They were dark and determined, the eyes of someone who had seen too much injustice and had decided to do something about it. She didn't yell or make threats. She just walked across the grass with slow, measured steps, each one like a countdown to Judgment Day. When she reached the 2 officers, she stopped and looked them both in the eye. "Badge numbers," she said, her voice calm as still water. "Now." Officer Davis tried to laugh it off. "Come on now. We were just—" Keisha held up her internal affairs badge, and the laughter died in his throat. "Sergeant Keisha Washington, Internal Affairs Division. Badge numbers." "I won't ask again." Officer Thompson started stammering, trying to explain what had happened, but Keisha cut him off with a look that could freeze fire. "I'm not talking to you yet," she snapped. Then she turned to Officer Davis. "Did you touch her?" "I never laid a hand on her," Davis said, but sweat was already beading on his forehead. Keisha nodded slowly. "Then you won't mind if I pull the surveillance footage from the park security cameras. You are wearing your body cameras, right?" The silence that followed was deafening. Both officers seemed to have forgotten how to speak. That's when Sarah noticed they weren't alone anymore. A small crowd had gathered. Joggers who had stopped to watch, an elderly man walking his dog, a woman with 2 small children who had paused their playground visit. All of them had their phones out. All of them were recording. The elderly man, wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap, stepped forward. His voice was steady and clear. "I saw him flip her dress up with that stick. Thought it was funny." That was all Keisha needed to hear. She pulled out her own phone and started recording. Officer refusing to provide badge identification. Suspected misconduct involving inappropriate contact with a civilian. Timestamp 4:47 p.m. Sarah found her voice again. It was small but clear, carrying across the gathering crowd. "His name is Marcus Davis. Badge number 41,762. His partner is James Thompson. Badge number 40,835. She had memorized them the moment she saw the numbers. Sometimes fear gives you superpowers. The power to remember every detail, every face, every word that might matter later. Keisha turned to the crowd, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent her career fighting for justice. "Anyone who witnessed what happened here, please stay. Your statements matter. Your voices matter. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Nobody was laughing now. Nobody was looking away. Keisha stepped up to Officer Davis, close enough that he could see his own reflection in her sunglasses. Is there anything you want to say to explain your actions here today? Davis glared at her, his jaw tight with anger. You're going to regret making this into a public show. Keisha just shook her head, unmoved by his threats. No, Officer Davis. You're the one who's going to regret it. I didn't make this a show. I just showed up. She turned to Sarah, and her voice became gentle, protective. You're not alone anymore, baby girl. For the first time in hours, Sarah felt like she could breathe again. By the time backup arrived, the sun was hanging low in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The Internal Affairs unit rolled up in unmarked cars, led by Detective Rosa Martinez. No relation to Sarah, but sharp-eyed and no-nonsense in the way that made bad cops nervous. Who's the lead here? Detective Martinez asked as she surveyed the scene. I am, Keisha answered, and from that moment she owned everything that happened next. They took statements from everyone: Sarah, the veteran, the woman with children, even the joggers who had stopped to watch. When it was Sarah's turn, she spoke with a clarity that surprised her. He made inappropriate comments about me being alone. Then he said he needed to do a visual inspection for weapons or contraband. He used his baton to lift my skirt. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't procedure. It was meant to humiliate me and make me feel powerless. The truth has a weight to it, and when Sarah spoke it, everyone felt it land. Keisha walked over to Officers Davis and Thompson, her badge gleaming in the fading sunlight. With deliberate precision, she removed their badges and weapons right there in front of everyone. Officer Davis exploded with rage. You're a traitor to your own kind. Keisha didn't even blink. If my own kind means officers who shame the badge and prey on innocent people, then yes, I'll turn on them every single time. The crowd buzzed with energy, phones raised high, history being captured in real time. This was the moment when everything changed, when someone finally said enough and meant it. In the middle of all the chaos, a little girl slipped through the crowd and handed Sarah a folded piece of paper. When Sarah opened it, she saw crayon letters that spelled out, "You are brave." I saw everything. That was the moment Sarah finally let herself feel proud instead of just afraid. Later that evening at the police station, the air conditioning hummed against the tension that filled every hallway. People stared and whispered as Keisha walked through the building, her uniform spotless, her body camera recording everything. Detective Martinez walked beside her, carrying evidence bags and files that would change everything. Captain Morrison, a weathered man who had seen 30 years of police work, met them outside the interview room. His face was grim. "Tell me you've got this case locked down tight, Washington." Keisha's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Witnesses, video evidence, body camera footage, and civilian testimony. It's airtight. Morrison shook his head. You just made enemies of half this department. Keisha met his gaze without flinching. Then I'll know which half to watch out for. In the small interview room, Sarah sat across from the Internal Affairs officer, her posture straight despite her exhaustion. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh white light. Are you okay to continue? Keisha asked gently. Sarah nodded. I'm ready. The case file was already thick, statements, photographs, body camera footage that showed everything. But the DA wanted more. They wanted a pattern, a history that would make it impossible for Officer Davis to claim this was just a misunderstanding. We need more victims to come forward, the Internal Affairs officer explained. One incident, even with witnesses, might not be enough. That's when Keisha went to work. She spent the rest of the night digging through years of complaint files, the ones that had been buried or dismissed for insufficient evidence. Most of them involved women who looked like Sarah. Young, alone, without the kind of connections that made police departments take notice. She found what she was looking for in a file from 2019. Keisha Brown, age 19, inappropriate body search during a traffic stop. Case closed due to insufficient evidence. Keisha called her the next morning, her voice gentle but determined. I know this is hard to talk about, but I need your truth. And maybe, if you're willing, I need your courage. Keisha was quiet for a long moment. Then, I thought nobody would ever believe me. I believe you, Keisha said simply. And I'm going to make sure everyone else does too. Meanwhile, Officer Thompson came forward on his own, pale and shaking like a man who hadn't slept in days. I didn't touch her, he confessed to Detective Martinez. But I didn't stop him either. I laughed when I should have spoken up. Keisha looked at him across the interview table. Not with anger, but with disappointment that somehow cut deeper. Do you understand what your silence cost her? What it cost all the women who came after her? Thompson nodded, shame dripping from every word. I can give you names, dates, stories. This wasn't the first time, and I know it wouldn't have been the last. The picture that emerged was ugly and clear. Officer Marcus Davis had been using his badge as a weapon against vulnerable women for years. The system had protected him because victims were afraid to speak up. And when they did, they were dismissed or ignored. By nightfall, Keisha stood before the police oversight board, a thumb drive in her hand containing everything they needed to know. The room was packed with reporters, community leaders, and citizens who had heard about what happened in Riverside Park. Justice doesn't arrive with fanfare, Keisha said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. It arrives because someone refuses to look away when it matters most. In that room, with cameras rolling and the whole city watching, nobody looked away. The next morning, Memphis woke up to a story that spread like wildfire. At barbershops and coffee shops, in grocery stores and school pickup lines, people were talking. Women who had been silent for years found their voices. Stories emerged from shadows where they had been hiding. Keisha listened to all of them, not in uniform, but as a neighbor, a sister, a woman who understood what it meant to be afraid and alone. She set up a safe space at the community center where women could come forward without fear of judgment or retribution. Keisha Brown showed up on the third day, nervous and wary. You sure this isn't just for the cameras? She asked. I don't do cameras, Keisha replied. I do justice. Keisha's story was 5 years old, but it cut just as deep as if it had happened yesterday. They made me feel crazy, she said, tears streaming down her face. Like I was making it all up or exaggerating what happened. Keisha nodded with understanding. They didn't want your story to be true. It was easier to make you doubt yourself than to admit they had a predator wearing a badge. Keisha agreed to testify, adding another crack to the wall of silence that had protected Officer Davis for so long. In a small cafe downtown, Sarah met with Keisha to talk about another potential victim. A teenage girl who was too scared to come forward, but whose mother had called with concerns. Why do they always think staying quiet will keep them safe? Sarah asked, stirring her coffee absently. Keisha smiled sadly. Because they've never heard what silence sounds like when it finally breaks. It's the loudest sound in the world. That night, Keisha spread everything out on a corkboard in her home office. Photographs, statements, police reports, witness testimonies. Red yarn connected names and dates and patterns that painted a clear picture. Marcus Davis had been hunting vulnerable women for years, and the system had let him do it. The hearing at City Hall was everything you'd expect from a place built to intimidate. Marble floors, brass fixtures, and portraits of stern-faced men who had run the city for generations. But truth showed up anyway, quiet and determined. Sarah spoke first, her voice steady despite the packed gallery behind her. He didn't have to use physical force. He used his position, his authority, his badge. He made it seem normal, like something I should just accept. I stayed quiet because I didn't think anyone would care about what happened to someone like me. Keisha followed, her hand shaking but her voice growing stronger with each word. He made me feel like I was less than human, like my dignity didn't matter. I wasn't exaggerating. I wasn't confused. I knew exactly what happened to me. One by one, other women stood up. A college student who had been harassed during a campus visit. A bus driver who had been pulled over for no reason. A high school senior who had been approached while walking home from work. Keisha laid the thick file on the council table. Affidavits, complaints, Officer Thompson's confession, and hours of testimony that painted a clear picture of abuse of power. Councilwoman Keisha Washington, no relation to Keisha, but equally committed to justice, looked up from the evidence with fire in her eyes. For too many years, these halls have dismissed patterns as coincidences and victims as troublemakers. That ends today. It felt like the entire city exhaled at once. The trial came 2 months later. The courthouse was packed every single day, with overflow crowds watching on screens in nearby buildings. Officer Marcus Davis sat at the defendant's table in a suit and tie, still carrying himself with the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. Sarah took the witness stand on the first day, wearing a simple blue dress and speaking directly to the jury. "He didn't have to touch my skin to leave bruises," she said. "Some wounds go deeper than what you can see." Keisha testified with quiet dignity, describing years of trauma and self-doubt. Officer Thompson confessed to his role in the cover-up, explaining how the culture of silence had made him complicit in Davis's crimes. The prosecutor made the case crystal clear. This is about a man who weaponized his badge to prey on women who he thought had no voice and no power. Today, we prove him wrong. Officer Davis never took the stand in his own defense. His lawyers knew his arrogance would only make things worse for him. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all charges. Sarah didn't cry when she heard those words. Her hands just relaxed in her lap, like she was learning how to breathe freely for the first time in months. Davis was led away in handcuffs, his swagger finally gone, replaced by the reality of what his actions had cost him. Keisha watched him go without gloating, just the quiet satisfaction of seeing justice served. Outside the courthouse, the sky was painted gold by the setting sun. There was no celebration, just relief. The kind that comes when a weight you've been carrying finally gets lifted from your shoulders. That night, Sarah and Keisha went back to Riverside Park. The same bench, the same pond, the same oak trees that had witnessed everything. But somehow it all looked different now. "Did you ever think it would end like this?" Sarah asked, sitting down without the careful fear she had carried for so long. Keisha smiled, settling beside her. "I never doubted that justice would come. I just never imagined you'd be the one to make it happen." Sarah looked out at the water, which reflected the first stars of evening. "I don't feel angry anymore," she said quietly. "I feel clean. Like I finally escaped from something I didn't even realize was suffocating me." Keisha nodded with understanding. "That's what injustice does to you. It becomes the air you breathe. You don't notice how hard it is to live until someone finally opens a window." Sarah laughed, surprising herself. "You didn't just open a window. You kicked down the whole door." "No," Keisha said firmly. "You kicked it down. I just helped you aim." They talked about building something new. A place where women could share their stories, find support, and breathe freely without fear. A place where silence wouldn't be mistaken for safety. "What would you call it?" Keisha asked. Sarah thought for a moment, watching the reflection of stars dance on the water. "The Stand," she said finally. "Because all I did was stand up. But sometimes that's everything. 3 weeks after the verdict, Riverside Park looked different in the autumn light. The trees were turning gold and red. Life was moving forward. And Sarah finally felt like she was part of it instead of just surviving it. She sat on the bench with a folder in her lap. Applications and letters from women who wanted to join the stand, who were ready to share their stories and help others find their voices. The organization was growing faster than she had ever imagined. Keisha joined her with 2 cups of coffee, still wearing her uniform, but with a peaceful expression Sarah had never seen before. "You really named it the stand?" Keisha asked with a smile. Sarah looked up from the letters in her lap. "It was never really silent," she said. "I just didn't know how loud truth could be until someone was finally willing to listen." A young girl approached them, maybe 10 years old, and handed Sarah an envelope before running back to her mother. Inside was a drawing of 2 women holding hands under a tree, with words in careful cursive. "You changed something important. Thank you." That's when Sarah understood that justice isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about remembering that every person has worth, that every voice matters, that silence should never be the price of safety. Keisha reached into her pocket and pulled out a small pin, a silver microphone surrounded by wings. She pinned it to Sarah's jacket with gentle precision. "This was my grandmother's," she said quietly. She wore it when she marched for civil rights back in the 1960s. She always said that speaking truth was the closest thing to flying that most people would ever know. As they walked away from the park, an autumn leaf spiraled down from the old oak tree, landing softly on the bench where everything had started. The wind picked it up and carried it toward the pond, where it floated on the surface like a golden promise. Sarah turned back one last time, then looked ahead toward whatever came next. She had found her voice in the darkest moment of her life, and now she would spend the rest of it helping others find theirs. The story was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. Justice, real justice, doesn't end with a verdict or a conviction. It lives in the courage of ordinary people who refuse to let wrong things become normal things. It grows in the spaces where truth is welcomed instead of feared. It flourishes when someone who has been knocked down decides to stand up and help others do the same. In Memphis, Tennessee, in a park by a pond under old oak trees, 2 women had proven that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be silent. Their voices had created ripples that would spread far beyond anything they could imagine, touching lives they would never know, changing a world that desperately needed changing. And it all started with one simple act of courage. A young woman who decided to stand up instead of backing down, and another woman who believed her voice was worth hearing. The rest, as they say, is history.